Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
It started with a phone call 3 days before Easter. I was unloading groceries, one hand balancing a bag of oranges, when my phone buzzed. Mom? Just that name on the screen made my stomach tighten. I hesitated, knowing exactly how the conversation would go before I even pressed accept. But I picked up anyway, because I always did. Hi, sweetheart, she said, her voice dripping with that syrupy tone she saved for when she was about to ask for something unreasonable while pretending it was for my own good. I was thinking about Sunday, about Easter. I just wanted to talk to you, about Matt. Right then I knew. I put the oranges down. She continued too quickly. I was wondering if maybe this year, maybe it's better if it's just family. Just us. Sarah's still having a hard time, and, well, seeing you two together, it might make her feel bad. That was her pitch. That my sister Sarah, who hadn't held down a job in 2 years, who still lived in her apartment that our mom paid for, who floated from drama to drama like it was her profession, might feel bad if she saw me with a decent man who treated me like a human being. Not even married, just dating, just existing in front of her. There was a long pause because I didn't know how to answer without blowing up. Are you serious? I finally asked. No anger in my voice, just that flat tone I developed over the years to manage conversations with her. The one that meant, I've heard worse, but I'm not buying it. She sighed, all theatrical, like she was being so patient with me. Emily, don't be like that. You know Sarah's still recovering from that whole thing with Brian. She's been fragile lately. I just don't want her to feel like she's less than. I wanted to laugh, or scream, or both. Because if there was one thing Sarah had never been in our family, it was less than. Sarah was the golden child in broken armor, the girl with endless second chances, the one everyone had to walk around like a landmine. And I was the one who learned to shrink, who kept quiet at dinners, who didn't bring home men if they had degrees or real jobs because it made things awkward. And here she was, asking me to erase a part of my life again, for peace, for Sarah. I said I'd think about it. What I didn't say was that this time, I wasn't going to play along. See, Matt wasn't just some guy. He wasn't a fling or a placeholder or a rebound. He was the first man who didn't flinch when I told him my family was complicated. The first one who listened and didn't make it about him. And when I told him about Sarah, about the way my mom always made me out to be the strong one, the one who could handle being overlooked, he didn't pity me. He got angry on my behalf. That mattered. So Sunday morning, I wore my best dress. The blue one my mom said once made me look too sharp, and Matt wore the gray sweater that made his eyes look even kinder. We brought a bottle of wine and a pie from his favorite bakery. When we pulled up to the house, Matt turned to me and asked, "Are you sure?" I lied. I said yes. My mother opened the door with a smile so wide it nearly cracked her face. "Emily, you look beautiful. And Matt, hello." She hugged us both, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't tried to write him out of the picture days earlier. That's her game. She acts normal to keep the peace while pulling strings under the table. In that, everything was like it always is. Too clean, too quiet, with the smell of pot roast covering something much less appetizing. Sarah was already there, sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone like she hadn't noticed us arrive. She looked up, gave a tight-lipped smile, and said, "Hey." That was it. Matt was warm, polite. He complimented the house, helped my mom in the kitchen, and even offered to carry dishes to the table. He didn't say a word about the phone call. And I didn't either. I watched my mom flutter around the table, fussing over Sarah's favorite side dishes, asking her how she'd been sleeping, if she needed more melatonin. I sat there like a guest in my own family, my boyfriend treated like an accessory I'd accidentally brought into the wrong scene. Then came the moment that told me something was off. It was subtle. Matt stepped outside to take a call. His brother or his office, I forget which. He was gone maybe 10 minutes. When he came back, something in his face had changed. Not much, but enough. His eyes met mine, just for a second, and I knew something had happened. Later, when we were alone in the car, he told me. My mom had followed him out, pretending to ask about his work. But then she'd said, lightly, like she was commenting on the weather, "You know, I'm just saying this because I care about you. But Emily, she's always been difficult. I've tried to help her, but she's very independent, very hard to connect with. You seem like someone who deserves more." And here's the kicker. Matt had recorded it. Not on purpose, not at first. He'd been using a voice memo app earlier and hadn't turned it off. It was dumb luck, or maybe fate. Either way, he had it all. When he played it for me, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just listened. Because deep down, I already knew. I'd always known. This wasn't new. This was just the first time someone else had proof. And that was when something shifted inside me. I stopped feeling like the good daughter, the reasonable one, the quiet one who lets things go for the sake of family. Because family, I realized, doesn't talk about you like you're defective. They don't make you feel like a burden in your own life. I didn't say anything that night, not to her, not to Sarah, not even to Matt, who kept asking if I was okay. I just smiled through dessert, nodded politely during the blessing, and watched my mother laugh at Sarah's stupid jokes like the world was just fine. But something had cracked, and cracks let light in. And here's where I'll ask you, have you ever been told to shrink yourself so someone else can feel taller? Have you ever sat at a table where your silence was the price of admission? Because next Easter, I wasn't planning to be silent. Not anymore. The thing about Easter in our family is that it always looked good on the outside. Perfect centerpiece, hand-folded napkins, wine that my mom would smugly tell us was from a private label she found during her last Napa trip, though we all knew it came from the grocery store 2 blocks from her house. The illusion was everything. The appearance of togetherness, of balance, of calm. It was like living inside a picture frame that someone forgot to dust for years. Clean edges, but the moment you breathe too hard, the whole thing reveals the grime beneath. We sat at the table like a Hallmark card. My mom at one end, my dad across from her, Sarah beside him, and me next to Matt, who'd already taken mental notes on who sat where and why. He was the kind of man who noticed patterns. Even now, as he smiled and passed the bread, I could see the wheels turning in his head, though he kept it hidden behind that polite charm he'd mastered from years in client meetings. I admired how well he could wear it. I, on the other hand, was always one bad fork placement away from cracking. My mom was in full performance mode. She was ladling out compliments like soup, especially to Sarah, who looked like she'd rolled out of bed 5 minutes before arriving. Makeup half smeared, hair in a messy bun that would have looked intentional on a teenager, but just looked lazy on her. My mother, of course, acted like she was the picture of elegance. "Sarah, I just love that top. It brings out your eyes. And those earrings, are they new?" Sarah mumbled something in response, barely looking up from her plate. My mom leaned over with a little conspiratorial smile, like they were sharing a secret about the rest of us. Meanwhile, Matt complimented the roast, helped my dad open a bottle of wine, and asked Sarah about her recent trip to Arizona. She launched into a rambling story about an Airbnb disaster and a guy she'd met who turned out to be married. I nodded along, trying not to grit my teeth. It wasn't the story. It was the way my mom clutched her chest and said, "Oh, honey, men can be such liars. You're too trusting. One day someone will see the real you." Like she was a wounded dove who needed constant reassurance, not a grown woman who created half of her own chaos. Matt caught my eye then, just for a second, and I saw it. The faint flicker of confusion, like someone realizing they were watching a play but didn't quite understand the script. I smiled politely and changed the subject to the weather. Dinner dragged on, and eventually my mom announced she was going to bring out dessert. Sarah excused herself to the bathroom, and my dad wandered outside to check on the grill, though no one had used it all day. That left Matt and me alone at the table. I reached for my wine, ready to say something sarcastic, but Matt touched my hand instead, gently but firmly, and said, "I need to tell you something." I froze. The tone in his voice wasn't light or casual. It was measured, cautious. I could tell he'd rehearsed this in his head. "When I stepped outside earlier, your mom came out too," he said. "She told me, well, it wasn't small talk. She said she was concerned about you, that you've always been difficult, that you don't make things easy for people." And then she said, he hesitated, not for drama, but because he wasn't sure how I'd take it. She said I deserve better. The wine turned to ash in my mouth. I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said, though it wasn't really a shock. It was confirmation. It was the final stitch in a quilt I'd been piecing together for years. My mother didn't just prefer Sarah. She actively tried to sabotage me when I showed signs of thriving. But it was never blatant. It was always a soft disapproval, a gentle push toward invisibility, framed as concern. She wore manipulation like pearls, subtle, elegant, and impossible to argue against. Matt pulled out his phone. "I didn't mean to record her," he said. "I'd left my memo app running from earlier, but it's all there, if you want to hear it." I nodded slowly, not trusting my voice, and he played it for me right there in the dining room, while the smell of brown sugar and cinnamon drifted in from the kitchen. I listened to my mother's voice, smooth as ever, saying the words I always suspected she thought, but never dared to say in front of me. She's always been the difficult one, so stubborn. She doesn't understand people. I've tried to help her, but she doesn't let me in. You seem different. You deserve better than all that baggage. I didn't blink. I just sat there, holding my wine glass, listening to my own mother describe me like a project that had failed inspection. Not a daughter. A disappointment she dressed in fake concern. The worst part? She didn't sound angry. She sounded calm, like she truly believed what she was saying. Like it was an act of kindness to tell my boyfriend he should run before I dragged him into the storm she always pretended was just my personality. When the audio ended, Matt put his phone down. "I didn't want to tell you during dinner," he said. "But I also didn't want to keep it from you. I should have said thank you. I should have hugged him. I should have burst into tears and said, 'Finally, someone sees it.' But I didn't do any of those things. I just looked at the kitchen door, where my mother was humming to herself and slicing pie, like she hadn't just knifed me in the back a few minutes ago. So I did what I always do. I put the smile back on. I got up, poured more wine, and walked into that kitchen like nothing had happened. "Need help with the whipped cream?" I asked, and she beamed at me like I was her favorite girl in the whole wide world. Matt followed me a moment later, his expression unreadable. Everything looked normal, everything sounded fine. But something had cracked wide open, and cracks, once made, don't go away. They just wait. The funny thing about realizing your family doesn't actually like you, not really, not fully, is that once the thought settles in, it doesn't let go. It doesn't scream or tear through the room. It just sits quietly behind your ribs, humming like a generator you forgot was there. It changes the way everything looks. You start watching memories like reruns you missed the first time, only now you catch the details, the raised eyebrows, the silence that weren't just awkward, the compliments given through gritted teeth. You replay moments and hear things you weren't allowed to hear the first time. It's not a new story. It's the same story, finally told without a filter. After dinner, I drove home in silence with Matt beside me. He didn't push. He knew better. He knew this wasn't something you poke with a stick, trying to get it to react. I stared out the window and counted houses. That's what I used to do as a kid to calm down. Back when Sarah was having one of her episodes, and our mom would tell me to go to your room and stay out of it. Back when I learned that the quiet ones don't get punished, but they don't get loved either. They just get used. When we got home, I went straight to the bedroom and sat on the floor. No lights, no music. Just sat there, thinking about the voice on Matt's phone, thinking about how casual it sounded, thinking about how many other boyfriends my mom might have whispered to, in passing, planting those little seeds that eventually grew into doubt. And maybe that's why they all left. Maybe I wasn't too intense. Maybe I wasn't too cold. Maybe I just never stood a chance, not in that house, not with that woman pulling threads behind every curtain. Matt sat down beside me and didn't say a word for a while. He just placed the phone in my lap, screen dark, as if offering me the truth again, in case I needed to replay it. I didn't. I'd memorized it already. Her voice had settled into my bones. I thought about high school, about prom, when I had saved up to buy my own dress because my mom had said money was tight, only to see her buy Sarah a new wardrobe 2 weeks later because she was going through a lot emotionally. I thought about college applications, how I got into 3 solid schools out of state, but she begged me to stay local for the family, while Sarah, who dropped out of community college twice, was sent on a soul-searching trip to Europe. I thought about the time my car broke down and I had to take the bus to work for 2 weeks, and she never once offered help. But when Sarah's tire went flat, my mom called a tow truck, bought her a new set, and told her not to worry about the cost. It had always been this way. Not favoritism. No, that's too simple a word. This was something deeper. It was as if I was expected to carry the weight of being fine so that Sarah could keep falling apart without consequence. I wasn't allowed fragility. I wasn't allowed anger. I was the capable one, the strong one. And being strong meant being invisible unless someone needed a pillar to lean on. The next morning, I made coffee and sat on the balcony while Matt made a few calls for work. I stared out at the street and wondered when exactly I had started protecting my mother from herself. Maybe it was when I was 12 and heard her crying through the wall about how hard it was to raise 2 girls when one of them didn't cry enough. Maybe it was when I realized that if I stood still, if I kept quiet, the storm would pass quicker. But now, at 32, sitting with my coffee and a knot of grief the size of a bowling ball lodged in my throat, I wasn't so sure that storm ever passed. Maybe I'd just gotten better at pretending I wasn't soaked. Matt came out eventually and sat across from me. "You haven't said much," he offered gently, not pushing. I nodded. I didn't have the language yet for the kind of betrayal that makes you doubt the ground beneath your feet, but I could feel something coming together inside me. Not rage exactly, and not sadness either. Something sharper, something colder. A kind of clarity I'd never let myself reach before. "She doesn't get to do this again," I said finally, the words like stones dropping into still water. "She doesn't get to wear the mask and make me the villain." Matt looked at me, not surprised. Maybe he saw this part of me long before I did. "So what do you want to do?" That's when the idea came to me, not like a thunderbolt, but like a whisper I had been ignoring for too long. I didn't want to argue with her. I didn't want to scream or accuse or try to get her to admit it. She never would. People like my mother are allergic to accountability. She'd twist it, flip it, paint herself as the misunderstood martyr, and I'd end up feeling like the monster for bringing it up in the first place. No, that wasn't the way. What I wanted was simpler, quieter, and so much more satisfying. I wanted her to hear her own voice. I wanted everyone to hear what she said when she thought no one was listening. I didn't want to tell the truth. I wanted her to tell it herself, without realizing it until it was too late. I turned to Matt, my voice steady now, like steel cooled and forged. "Next time we see them, play the recording. Just play it. Let her explain it." Matt blinked, surprised not by the plan, but by the calm in my voice. He nodded slowly. "You sure?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The decision had already been made. It had been made over decades. Layered into every be nice, every don't make a scene, every quiet moment when I swallowed my pride and let her script my role in her little family performance. But not this time. This time I wasn't reading from her script. This time I was going to let the audience hear what really went on behind the curtain. And for the first time in years, maybe in my entire life, I actually looked forward to going back to that house. Because this time, I wasn't showing up as the good daughter. I was showing up as the one who finally heard the truth and wasn't afraid to let everyone else hear it too. Easter Sunday should have been over. By all appearances, it was. The roast had been eaten, the pie reduced to a few scattered crumbs on a plate with a bent fork, and the wine bottles stood like exhausted soldiers at the edge of the dining room sideboard. My mother had cleared away the dessert plates with her usual flair, smiling, chirping about how Sarah should absolutely apply for that customer service job at the clinic. Because, as she so helpfully put it, you're just so good with people. No mention, of course, of my recent promotion or the new team I was managing. That was too sharp, too adult, too real, not soft and broken and needy enough for her taste. I had played my part through the meal like a seasoned actress, smiling on cue, sipping my wine, asking polite questions, and pretending to care about Sarah's seventh retelling of her latest dating disaster, which was really just a thinly veiled demand for sympathy. Matt had done the same, nodding and murmuring at the right moments, never letting on that he was holding a live grenade in his jacket pocket. The recording was still on his phone, saved under a blank file name, the moment suspended in digital amber, just waiting to explode. And I knew it had to happen then. Right there, in front of everyone, not tomorrow, not over the phone. It needed to hit with full force, without rehearsal, without warning. My mother had always counted on my hesitation. She had built her kingdom on the assumption that I would always protect the illusion, that I would never set fire to the curtain because I was too scared of what the audience might see behind it. But she had underestimated how far I'd come, how deep her words had cut this time, how tired I was of cleaning up after the lies she wrapped in lace. It was Sarah who set the stage, unintentionally. She was sitting back at the table, twisting a cloth napkin in her lap, and droning on about some friend who had betrayed her, again. Something about money or maybe a shared apartment. I wasn't paying close attention. The point was always the same. Someone had done her wrong, and now she needed someone else, usually my mother, to fix it, coddle her, validate her victimhood. My mother nodded along sympathetically, like a therapist who had already picked a favorite patient. I stood quietly, walked toward the kitchen to refill my glass, and gave Matt the smallest nod. It was nothing dramatic, just the kind of glance a person might give someone in a crowded room when they were ready to go home. Except this time, it didn't mean let's leave, it meant let's begin. Matt cleared his throat. He didn't stand right away, just shifted in his chair, pulling his phone from his pocket and resting it on the table like a man about to check the weather. Then, without a word, he tapped the screen and hit play. At first, nobody understood what was happening. My mother kept talking, her voice competing with the faint tinny sound coming from the phone speaker. Sarah frowned, looked confused. My father glanced over, probably thinking it was some work call Matt had forgotten to mute. And then they heard her voice, crystal clear, smooth, measured. That unmistakable tone of faux concern that she had perfected over the years, now laid bare without her knowledge. You know, I'm just saying this because I care about you. But Emily, she's always been difficult. So stubborn. She doesn't understand people. I've tried to help her, but she's very independent. Very hard to connect with. You seem like someone who deserves more. It was as if someone had cut the air open with a knife. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was hollow, like the sound had been sucked out of the room entirely. My mother froze, the serving spoon still in her hand. Sarah looked like she'd been slapped. My dad straightened slowly, the way a man might do when trying to remember whether he left the stove on. I watched her face carefully. The transformation happened in stages. First came confusion, then recognition, and then the pale bloom of horror as she realized what had been played, what had been heard, what had been exposed. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. For once in her life, she had no script. Matt didn't gloat. He didn't say a word. He just looked at her and waited. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "How dare you record me? That's completely inappropriate. That was a private conversation. You had no right." But she didn't finish, because in the corner of the room, a second voice cut in, softer, slower. It was Sarah. She said stuff like that to my boyfriend too. Everyone turned. Sarah wasn't looking at anyone. Her eyes were on the table, but her voice was steady, like she was reading from a painful memory she'd tucked away a long time ago and had finally decided to pull out into the light. She told Greg I was too sensitive, Sarah said. Told him I wasn't ready for something real, that I'd probably make him miserable. There it was, the fracture, the moment where all the cracks in the foundation finally met and the floor began to give. My father looked between them, between us, like someone trying to find a familiar landmark in a city he no longer recognized. My mother snapped back with the fury of someone whose control was slipping. That is not true. I never said anything like that. This is completely out of context. But it wasn't. Not anymore. There was context, and it was standing right in front of her. The next minutes were a blur. Voices raised, accusations flung. My father pushed back from the table, ran a hand through his thinning hair, and muttered something about needing air. My mother chased after him, calling his name, her voice cracking. She was unraveling, and for the first time, she couldn't blame me for it. Couldn't paint me as the dramatic one, the sensitive one, the one who always makes things worse. I stayed seated. I didn't move, neither did Matt, and neither did Sarah. When the door slammed and we heard my father's car start, the silence that followed wasn't tense. It was peaceful, like something rotten had finally been cut away. My mother came back 10 minutes later, eyes red but dry, and stared at us like a woman trying to remember where she had left her mask. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something that wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was fear. Real, honest fear. You're destroying this family, she said, barely above a whisper. I stood then. I looked her dead in the eye, steady and calm. No, I said. You did that a long time ago. I just stopped covering for you. And then I walked out. She didn't call after me, not this time. She knew the show was over. 1 week after Easter, the group chat was dead. Not just quiet or slow or polite with tension, completely, utterly dead. No funny meme from Aunt Ruth. No passive-aggressive updates from Mom about new throw pillows or Sarah's breakthrough in therapy. No awkward invitation to Sunday brunch that none of us really wanted to attend. It had gone still, like someone had pulled the plug on the fake little digital family portrait we all used to pretend was normal. I checked it once or twice a day, almost out of habit. The same way you glance at an empty mailbox, even when you know there won't be anything inside it. I wasn't expecting anything, and yet, some small part of me still looked for that blinking notification, some proof that the wreckage we left behind hadn't erased everything, only changed it. Matt and I had spent the following days in something between calm and suspension. There were no celebratory speeches, no clinking glasses over the justice served, no dramatic sobs or emotional collapses in the bathroom. It was quieter than that. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm when all the windows are cracked open and the wet air just sits there, heavy and full of something unspoken. I went back to work, held meetings, reviewed quarterly reports, and acted like I hadn't just set fire to a carefully curated illusion my mother had been constructing for over 3 decades. Matt was supportive without being suffocating, present without asking for more than I could give, which, at that point, wasn't much beyond silence and occasional eye contact across the kitchen counter. On Thursday morning, my dad called. He didn't leave a message, just a missed call with no follow-up. I stared at the screen for what felt like an hour, torn between the same impulse I'd always had, to pick up, smooth it over, say something rational, and the quiet, stubborn refusal that had been growing stronger every day since Easter. He called again that night, this time with a message that simply said, "I'm at the Marriott near the exit. Your mom's trying to talk. I'm not." It was the most honest sentence I had ever heard him say in my life. I didn't call back. I didn't ignore it out of anger, not entirely. It was more like exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying other people's chaos for so long that your arms forget how to hold anything else. I had spent so many years playing the good daughter, the reliable one, the woman who smiled through her own erasure because it was easier than being blamed for breaking the family's fragile sense of harmony. It wasn't just a role, it had been a survival tactic. And now that I had finally let go of that role, I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be in the aftermath. All I knew was that I wasn't going back to her house, not with apologies unspoken and years of manipulation still hanging in the air like invisible mold. Sarah texted 3 days after the dinner. Her message was short, too careful, too neat. "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't know. I think I see it now. I'm in therapy." I read it 3 times, wondering if it was real or if it was just another performance, this time for me. I didn't answer right away. Maybe I wouldn't answer at all, not because I didn't believe she was trying, but because I wasn't sure I had anything left to give her. Forgiveness in our family had always meant pretending the wound never happened, and I couldn't do that anymore. Matt didn't push. He never asked what I planned to do next. He simply existed beside me, anchoring me to a world that wasn't dictated by guilt or roles I never agreed to play. And one night, as we were getting ready for bed, he sat down beside me on the edge of the mattress and said, "You know, there's something I didn't tell you." I looked up, unsure if I had the energy for another twist. He reached for his phone again, hesitating for just a second. "I didn't stop recording after your mom said what she said," he said quietly. I walked away, but the app was still running. I didn't think anything of it until I played it back. "There's something else, at the end." He played the clip again, but this time, it wasn't her voice filtered through careful cruelty. This was something else, quieter, mumbled, as if she thought no one was listening anymore. The recording was shaky. There was movement, a faint rustling of fabric, and then her voice, not speaking to anyone, not performing, just talking to herself, the way people do when they think they're alone. "That girl was always in the way," she muttered, almost too low to catch. "Too loud, too proud, too damn hard to love." And then it cut out. I didn't say anything for a long time. The audio ended, and the room felt smaller, tighter, as if those words had pulled in the walls. I sat there staring at nothing, wondering if maybe that had been the real truth all along. Not that I was difficult, or stubborn, or cold, but that I was a reminder. A living mirror my mother couldn't stand to look at. Maybe I reminded her of everything she had failed to be, everything she had pushed down and labeled as too much. Matt reached for my hand, but I wasn't ready for comfort. I wasn't sad, not really. I wasn't angry either, at least not in the way I had been. I just felt done. I didn't need her to love me. I didn't need her to change. I just needed her to stop pretending. And more than that, I needed to stop pretending myself. The next morning, I blocked her number. Not out of malice, not as revenge, but as a boundary. A line in the sand that said, "I see what you are, and I'm done pretending it's something else." It wasn't a punishment. It was a release. And now I'll ask you the same question I've been asking myself. The same question I haven't found an easy answer for. Was I cruel for doing what I did? For exposing her like that? For letting everyone see the performance unravel? Should I have protected her again the way I always had, even when she cut me to the bone? Or was this finally the moment I chose myself? Because here's the truth no one likes to admit. Sometimes justice doesn't come in the form of a big speech or a perfect confrontation. Sometimes justice is just walking away with your head high, while the liar's voice plays on repeat behind you, echoing in the silence they created themselves. Sometimes justice is the absence of you, the empty chair at the dinner table, the unanswered message, the silence that screams louder than anything you could ever say. And maybe that's what being the good daughter really meant in the end. Not staying quiet, not keeping the peace, not taking the fall for someone else's chaos, but finally choosing to stop carrying the weight of someone who never once tried to lift you back. I still don't know what kind of woman that makes me, but I know for once, I'm not ashamed of her.